All right. So you are a family physician. Is your son 5?
He's 5 and I have a daughter that's almost 2.
Oh, okay. I don't think I knew that you had 2. Anywho, so we have the 5-year-old in common. But you're a family physician that started to become interested in smartphones and how they're affecting children. So your Instagram account is at the smartphone effect. And I'm curious when you became interested in that and why.
Yeah, so I feel like I came back from mat leave after my daughter. And for years now, we've been seeing increased visits for mental health in kids and teenagers. And I think I came back and it was just even more so. Obviously, COVID increased everything too. Um, but we're seeing more complex mental health, more admissions, more suicidal thoughts and attempts, self-harm. So what stood out to me is as I was seeing these kids and they would tick all the boxes for depression and anxiety, ADHD according to the DSM, they fit the criteria. Um, but they'd be on 1, 2, sometimes 3 medications, and they weren't getting any better. Headphone fall through.
The fancy the fancy wireless ones. This is why,
Oh
look at
my
me.
God. Yeah, these are also my husband's, because I, of course, left mine at work. Um, so yeah, I have kids on multiple medications and they weren't getting better. And I'm like, what is going on? Like there's something else going on here. So as I would talk to them about, like, what do you do for fun? What are your hobbies? What extracurriculars do you do? And it was like time and time again, they would just kind of look at me blankly, and then they would kind of motion to their phone, which is, of course, always right beside them in the encounter. Um, and they would kind of say, like, that's what I do with the majority of my time. I was like, okay, something's going on here. So I started to look into the research and it just became so clear so quickly that this is at the root of so much of what's going on with this mental health epidemic that we're seeing. Um, so I just felt like I had to speak out and do something. And that's why I created the Instagram platform. And I'm really thankful for you for letting me come on here, because I know that your audience is a lot of parents that maybe their kids don't have social media yet. And so I'm hoping that maybe we can change the talk a little bit and delay when they might make that decision.
I feel like there's this knowledge, there's like this overlying knowledge that everyone kind of knows overuse of a smartphone is not good for kids.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's so widely used and it's like everyone just has one
Yeah.
that we just kind of like brush it under the rug and we're like, oh, like it's not going to happen to my kid. Like it's not going to
Yes.
affect my kid. Like I'll put a couple boundaries in place and you know what I mean? And so it's frustrating to me because I'm terrified of that. Like Milo's only 5 and I'm like, oh my God, like dreading the day where he wants a phone. And then for me to say like, no, you can't have one. And then him to be like, well, all my friends have one. And it's like, oh,
Yeah. I feel like that's the slippery slope that I see too, is like, so the stat would say 50% of kids have a smartphone by 11, like
mm,
99% by high school. Oh yeah. And so I think that's the trap that parents innocently fall into, is like, well, all my friends already have one and they want to get a hold of their kids. And so they hand it over, but without knowing what's behind that, it just quickly turns into them getting onto all of these apps that their parents don't even know about.
know about.
And if you don't talk about it, oh my God, I need bigger ear holes.
This is why I cannot do the wireless headphones because my ear holes are not big enough.
I'm instantly realizing why people wear the ones like this. I was always like, oh, why do they wear those ones that go over the head? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try not to tilt my
Yeah.
head so much.
I feel like we are kind of like the first group, like we didn't grow up with smartphones,
Correct.
which now we have children. And so we have never navigated childhood, teenage years with smartphones. Like I actually did a little bit of a Google search and um the first iPhone came out in 2007 and I started my master's program in 2009. So I think on Google it said smartphones became kind of like widely used around 2010.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we were already pretty much adults at that point.
Yeah, we don't know what it's like as parents to, because we're also not using social media for the same things that our kids are, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we do mindlessly scroll and we do all of that, but they're using it for pornography and bullying and just all kinds of dark things that I think parents don't really understand.
I feel like everything that happens in the world, it's like this massive pendulum. Like it goes to like the extreme and then it kind of starts to like balance out a little bit.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's just about to start to balance out. I feel like the last 5-10 years have been terrible
Yeah.
for smartphones. But now as more information comes out, I'm hoping it's going to start to get better.
Yeah.
But why do you think it became such a major issue?
Yeah, so I honestly feel like it's this perfect storm of many different factors. I mean, the obvious thing to blame is that since 2012, 2010, when smartphones became commonplace, these platforms are trying to make us as addicted as possible. Like, obviously, that's a huge part of it. Um, but I think it's what you already touched on, that parents are a bit innocently ignorant about the topic and they're not really sure what their kids are doing. And I find once kids get into that world where they're quite addicted and spending a lot of time, they're also not talking to their parents as much. And so there becomes this divide where they're not relating to one another. So there's that. Um, I think there's a big part of it that the parents fear the outside world, which, we're scared to have our kids go outside alone these days because what happens if they get hurt? What happens if someone kidnaps them? And so it's naturally led to kids spending a lot more time indoors. And I would argue now that at this point, it's a lot more dangerous for your kid to be locked inside their bedroom for hours at a time. We need to get them back outside. Um, the other thing is obviously the social pressures. So if 50% of your peers at age 11 have a phone, it goes up every year. If you're the only one without a phone, you're begging your parents. And so, parents don't want their kids to feel sad and feel left out. So there's that. I think everyone's just kind of joined the party, so to speak, and hoping for the best. And then there's also now, especially in education, like this huge pendulum swing towards dependence on tech in the classroom. Like all these tech companies are telling the the board of education, like, we are the best way. You need to implement tech into all of your teachings. It's going to make them better students. When I think there's a lot of evidence now telling us that that's not the case and they actually don't learn as well. And then a huge thing that you talk about all the time too is parents are busy. We're all busy. So, sometimes they're on their phone for longer than they should be because we're trying to get things done. Or kids are in a lot of organized activities now, multiple times a week. And that's great. They're doing those things, but we're not spending as much quality time as a family where there's really just that talking piece. So there's that. And then COVID, which I don't even need to talk about, but obviously that took everything that was already happening and just intensified it that much
Amplified
more.
it.
Yeah.
I was just listening to a podcast and she was talking about how a vulnerable period for kids and adolescents is like 9 years old to, I think she went all the way up to like age 25. But just saying, like, in there, there's like a period of time where your brain, something about like brain development and
Yeah.
like it's like being restructured or something like that. And so it's almost like you were saying a perfect storm in that this is when children typically get a phone. And most adults don't do well when they overconsume social media and spend time on their phones. So now imagine a child in this vulnerable part of their life where they're just trying to like gain self-confidence and figure out who they are and like fit in and all the things that go on when you're in high school. And we're just handing them a smartphone. It's like, oh,
I feel like a good comparison is so I think what you were talking about is that our frontal lobe or prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until age 21. So that's the part of our brain that is responsible for making good decisions, insight, our personality. Um, and so if you think about driving, like we don't give kids a license until they're 16 and they're still not fully developed then. But, a 10, 11, 12-year-old probably could physically learn how to drive. They probably could drive, but we don't let them drive because they don't have the frontal lobe development to make good decisions on the road. Just as the same as someone who has dementia, we take their license away when they no longer have that frontal lobe activity that's going to let them make good decisions. So it's like we're handing them these devices that have the ability to be super dangerous, and they don't have the cognitive capacity to handle it.
and similar to the car analogy, we go through extensive training on how to drive a car and how to navigate that. We have like a license.
Yeah.
You can't go fishing without a license. Like there's so many things that you need a license for
Yeah.
and training. So it's the same kind of thing. It's like we're handing them a phone that they're going to be using hours a day. And it's just kind of like, here you go. There's no like standardized training. There's no program that they have to go through. I don't know. I feel like it should be in the curriculum. I don't know that it is. I remember doing research on, this was like a long time ago, just on the impact that like magazine images and stuff like that have on people with regard to like body satisfaction and all that kind of stuff. And I remember thinking like, how is there no media literacy course in high school? Or, like when you start to consume all these things, like, and now with social media, it's like times 10. Like there was no smartphone when I did that research. Oh my God, I'm so old.
Well,
Oh my God.
and the vast majority of the high schools in our district anyways, Waterloo, and Cambridge, once you get to high school, they don't even enforce a cell phone policy. So that's actually one of the things that I'm trying to do is talk to some of the local high school principals, because the kids need a break in the day from this addiction, and they're just on their phone all day. My husband's a high school teacher, and it's like, how do you teach kids that aren't listening to you? They have no capacity to listen. It's so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in a perfect world, I always like to play this little game. Like in a perfect world, like how do you think smartphones should be managed? Like if there was a law, if there were like policies in the school system, like what do you think it should be?
In a perfect world. Okay. I think as far as the school goes, in high school, perfect to me would be the cell phones go in their locker. Oh, no. Perfect world would be that parents have parental controls on their child's phone that they can turn off the phone for the school hours. Like They don't need to be snapping each other during school. So that's a perfect scenario, that the phone's just dead when you're at school. But if that wasn't the case, then if they can have them in their lockers during all instructional time, and ideally in between classes too, because I think you need a good disruption in that constant spiking of dopamine to really be able to, maybe we can get into that, like how that all goes down, but to try to replenish that baseline of your dopamine so that it's not bringing you down so much. And breaks of only, because some classes will give you a cell phone break after 30 minutes if you just focus for 30 minutes. Like, it's not long enough. All they're going to be doing is thinking about that 30 minutes when they can use their phone. So just, I don't know if that really answers your question, I guess, as far as school
No, it
goes, but
does.
yeah.
It's like when you were saying that, I was thinking my husband went and saw I believe it was Chris Rock live at Scotiabank in Toronto. And he said when he went into the arena, everyone had to put their cell phones in like this little pouch that closed like a magnet on top. And so you could not use your cell phone at all because they had the control to be able to open that pouch.
Yeah.
And like, that's a perfect solution.
I know. I think that is a perfect solution. I think I don't know if the challenge there would be the budget. I don't know. Like,
yeah, I know. I'm just, this is our make believe.
This is
world.
this is utopia. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like, they can control cell phones. Yeah, even just making it a rule. Yeah. What you said your husband's a high school teacher. Like, what is what do they have them in their pocket in class?
Yeah.
What?
So right now, because there's not a policy from the school board will not get involved, basically. So it's up to each school, which means it's up to the principal and the teacher to figure it out. So right now at his school, it's sort of class by class. So there are teachers who are very strict about it and say, keep it in your bag. If I see it out, I'm taking it or whatever. But class to class, that will change. And so I think what we know about kids, like obviously consistency and routine is going to be more beneficial. So it really does need to be a school-wide policy. There was a high school in Cambridge last year that implemented a policy, and I talked to her, and it was remarkable, the changes that she noticed. She's like, you would not believe, like, our suspensions were cut in half. Kids were coming to us to say, like, can you keep my phone? Because I like the way that I feel. Like, it would just, once they get over that sort of adjustment and their little tantrum, then they're going to be better.
Yeah. Even me, like the last maybe 2-3 weeks, I have really, especially like once Milo's home from school, my phone is not necessarily attached to me anymore. Like, I'll leave it downstairs when I go do bath time and bedtime routine, or I'll even go for a walk without my phone.
Yes.
Whereas before, like, I could not do anything without my phone. Now, the time that I did go for a walk without my phone, there were so many beautiful trees with like the leaves changing colors. And I was so pissed that I couldn't take a picture, but still, I survived and it was fine. But my overall mood and mental health, obviously I made other changes too, like going to yoga, like different things, but not having extended periods of time without my phone has made a massive difference for me.
Same.
So, and I'm an adult.
Right.
Yeah.
You have that frontal lobe. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about addiction? I honestly, I feel like when you say kids are addicted to their phones, people probably like roll their eyes like, oh, okay. Like, because when we hear the word addiction, we're thinking, like addicted to substances. So how does addiction to a smartphone happen and what does it look like?
Yeah. So I want to try to explain it in a way that's not just like the standard dopamine answer, because I think everybody kind of knows it relates to dopamine, but I think if we get a good understanding of what's really happening and how this truly is the same as like cocaine or meth, it's all the same mechanism. It does make a lot more sense. Um, so dopamine is a chemical messenger in our brain. It's responsible for motivation, drive, movement as well, but that's not important here. So when we think about dopamine, we have a baseline of dopamine all the time. The baseline is going to be partially genetics, partially because of our life experiences. And then every time that we do something that gives us pleasure, we get that spike in dopamine. The really important factor is to keep homeostasis in our bodies. After every dopamine spike, we actually get a drop below baseline. And it's in those drops that we feel we don't like how that feels. So we feel craving and we want to feel that again. So that's the basic premise. Different things will give us bigger peaks and drops. So for example, cocaine gives a smaller spike than methamphetamine, which is why meth is so highly addictive so quickly. If you look at social media, and if we use the stat that the national average, this would be US based, but the national average of kids on their phones per day, teenagers, 9.5 hours. Yeah. So if you,
What?
yes, I know. And I've had some patients, I'll say like, will you show me your phone? And we'll like, they'll bring out their screen time and yeah, it's true. So if you imagine that you are getting a peak constantly, 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 likes, comments, the algorithm's feeding you things you love. We also have to understand that dopamine is not infinite. So if you imagine that dopamine is like a ball pit, there's only so much there. So if we are constantly getting spikes and drops all throughout the day without breaks, we don't have enough dopamine to replenish us back. And eventually that baseline actually starts to fall. And that's when you start to see that they aren't interested in other things. So kids come in and they're not wanting to go to school. They don't want to hang out with their friends. They've quit their favorite sports team. They're not as interested in doing other things because it doesn't give them that same peak. Now, eventually, the social media won't even give them that peak. And that's when they fall into that real addiction, as you want to put it. And like, it sounds dramatic, but it's not. Like the hold that these phones and these apps have over these kids is literally, yeah, they need to be rehabilitated.
Are parents ever involved? Like in the like these appointments and like the information and because like you said, a lot of parents are probably unaware of all of this stuff. And you know, if they don't see their teenager for a few hours, they're not necessarily thinking they're like glued to their phone.
Yeah,
Like, would a lot of parents, they would probably be surprised to hear those stats and to understand how that works. And I bet you people that have teens would hear that description that you just gave of the dopamine and how it like slowly results in depression and not being motivated and all that kind of stuff. And people would probably be like, holy shit, like that's
I know.
exactly what happened.
Yeah, I absolutely try to explain it to parents. And honestly, they're not surprised. They're not surprised because they live day to day with their kids. Like when the kids are coming to me, by that point they're already quite depressed or quite anxious. Like they're wondering if they need medication. So the parents know that they're not doing well. So when I explain these things, they're kind of like, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Um, However, the reason why I think I need to speak about this and we need to spread the word about this is because I want to prevent kids from getting there. Like
to that point.
I do. Yeah. I unfortunately have a lot of parents who will say to me, like, I hope that this is going to help my younger kid, but my older one, I feel like she's so lost in it now that I don't know what we're going to do. Like they just feel really very helpless um, in trying to battle the whole thing.
So what, obviously, if you have younger kids, you can try to prevent this from even happening in the first place. But if someone is listening and they have a child that's, let's say, 17, 18, and is already at that point, or maybe they know somebody that has a kid that's struggling with this, what is like if someone's addicted to alcohol, it's like we understand what the treatment for that
Yeah.
looks like.
Yeah.
So what would this entail? And I'm not talking about medication. And like I'm sure there's most situations where it's like before you start a behavioral kind of treatment plan, maybe you do want to be medicated so that your baseline is, and like
Yeah. Yeah.
you're able to go through the treatment and like have it work.
Yeah.
RENEE, like you are terrible at explaining
I know what
this,
you're saying.
but like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yes, I have a PhD in psychology and this is
No, I know
what I
exactly what
sound
you're
like
saying.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you need to be medicated in order for the
To
therapy
like
to be able to
partake.
do its
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. So, but what does the behavioral, like, are there places where you can go where someone specializes in smartphone addiction? Like, does this exist?
No, I'm like literally any counselor I meet now, I'm like, can you get into this field? Because I would love, yes, like anyone want a partner? Like, I think that there needs to be somewhere to send people 100%.
Or like a program?
Yeah. And the thing too, it's hard with kids because it's so nuanced. Like different kids, especially depending on their um, age, so their frontal lobe development and how far along they are, or their social supports. Some kids have better insight in it than others. So, like, some kids want to make changes, and so if I say to them, "Cut your screen time in half for the next month before you see me next," they'll do it. Whereas there are others who will not. And so
Mm-hmm.
then at that point, it really comes down to whether the parent is willing to enforce what I would recommend. So
Well, you
it's
would hope
tricky.
that a parent would be on board, if your kid's life is being
Yeah.
severely affected. Because even me personally, like I know people who they're not going to university, they're not interested in things. They've like quit teams, like I see this happening as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a big deal. So the thing that I want to stress is like, I don't want people to treat it any differently than you would an addiction to a substance.
Yeah.
We're
Yes.
all about like getting people help when they're addicted to a substance, but the smartphone thing is such a tricky, like, I don't know that people take it seriously enough, and they need to, because the result of that are the things that are serious, like depression and anxiety, and that affects your entire life, especially at that age. Like that's where you're building like long lasting friendships, and
Yeah.
you're like thriving on athletics, or maybe you're into the theater or whatever, and then you're just going to give that up. And like
I
it's
know.
such a important time in someone's life.
That's it. I often say, like, you know, we have memories of when we were kids, like doing ridiculous things, going to bush parties and, making some bad decisions. But like these kids aren't even doing that. They're not even going out and partying. Like, is their greatest memory going to be looking back and thinking about that TikTok video that they saw? Or snapping their friends right next to each other. It's really sad to me. I feel like they are being robbed.
Yeah. And I always think to myself, like, when I'm not a big consumer of content. Sometimes I do because it's kind of like my job and I need to know what's going on or like trends or whatever. But like, I'm always like, Renee, like, you don't know these people. Like, what are you doing? Like, I remember Alex Cooper from Call Her Daddy was talking about how she was constantly like scrolling TikTok or something. And she's like, I'm in my backyard, like it's a beautiful sunny day, and I'm like sitting here looking at strangers that I don't even know. It's
Yeah.
like consuming content is great and like I learn a lot of good things. Like I see videos that like completely change my life and like inspire me like for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like you can't stop living your own life. You know what you should do? I remember when I was in my PhD, I don't know why this stuck out to me when we were talking about like, is there even a program for kids to follow if they struggle with this?
Yeah.
There was a book, my area was eating disorders, and there was a book called Overcoming Binge Eating Disorder. And it was like basically a program within a book that people could follow from like a psychologist. There needs to be a book like that
Yeah.
on this topic. So you should write that.
One of
Get on
my
it.
future goals. Yeah. Future goals. Yeah, it'd be
So,
great.
okay. I recently had Matthew McConaughey on the
You
podcast. I don't
did.
know how, like,
Yeah.
that was wild.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing that when I was doing research about him and his family, was that his oldest son, never got social media or a smartphone until he was 15 years old. And his reasoning for that was like, he wanted him to live his life
Yeah.
and like make memories of his own instead of living life just to be able to show it to strangers online.
Yeah.
Like it really made a lot of sense. So for your kids, what age do you think you would be like, okay, let's get an Instagram account or like sign up for social media?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I'm trying to frame it as not so much an age question. Um, I see 16 thrown around a lot, and I think that's a good benchmark for social media. Um, but I think really when you're thinking about, is my child ready for this responsibility? Because really it is a responsibility. It's a lot. Um, you want to ask them, like have a conversation or ask yourself, what kind of kid are they now? Do they know who they are now? So some of the questions that I think you could talk to each other about is like, are you going to school? Are you trying in school? That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be an A student, but like, are you putting forth a good effort in school? Are you doing your homework and your chores without your parents begging you to do them? Are you trustworthy? Like, do you lie to your parents? Um, can you carry on a conversation with an adult? Like, could you order your own meal at the restaurant, or does mom and dad have to do that? Um, do you have other activities that you enjoy doing already that is taking up some of your time? Do you already have mental health concerns or things that you're treated for? Because I think those kids, especially, I have um, parents who made their child wait until 16, and I was like, that's amazing, but she still deteriorated very quickly after that, and she was 16. So it wasn't an age, she just wasn't ready for that step. So more or less, like, do you already have a strong sense of who you are, and will that sense of self hold up to this whole internet world telling you who you should be and what you should do? Like another example of a patient I had, she so sad, like TikTok addiction, big time TikTok addiction. And she's like, I stand in front of the mirror and change my outfit over and over and over again because I'm just so worried about who's going to judge what I'm wearing. And in a month, we took her TikTok from, she was like 6 to 8 hours a day on TikTok. We went to 2 hours and she came back a month later. She's not perfect, obviously, but she was like, I already feel more confident. Like I'm just putting on what I want in the morning and I'm not thinking about what other people are going to think.
Hmm.
So yeah, really like, is your kid strong is probably the better question.
Determining when they would start based on them as an individual and not necessarily like, okay, you're this age. Now you
Have at
can,
her.
yeah, exactly. Once a parent is like, okay, let's get you a smartphone and, set you up and blah, blah, blah. What are the boundaries or things that they should put in place to kind of like ease them into it? Like, what are some rules that you'll have in your family when it comes to social media and smartphones?
Yeah. And I'd start by saying, like, hopefully by the time you do give your child their first smartphone, it doesn't have to be a smartphone at first. You could just give them a flip phone. I think I want to add, like, I think a lot of parents, um, the first phone that they give their child is more of a safety issue. Like they want to be able to contact them if they're away for the night or at a sporting event or whatever. Very reasonable. Usually around grade 7. I think it's probably not necessary for a kid to have their own phone in primary school. But like, 7 and above, you can start with a dumb phone, which is just a talk and text phone that doesn't have any features. Like let them show the responsibility to take care of that much cheaper phone as well. And see how they do with that before you transition into the full thing. So anyways, by the time you're ready to give them a phone, hopefully they're going to be well prepared because you've been having conversations leading up to this point for a long time. You're educating them about what they might see online, what to do if they see something that makes them uncomfortable online. Um, so that's happened. And then when you hand over the phone, I feel like it's important to say right from the get go, like, this is my phone that I pay for, and I'm letting you use it. And we're going to work through this as a family because this is new for all of us. But we need to set some boundaries. And you can make this decision. I think monitoring your child's phone is very reasonable. I would have, before I got into all of this, I would have totally thought that was very helicopter parenting. Um, but what I've learned is it's just there's so much danger out there that we kind of don't have a choice at this point. I mean, hopefully, like you say, the pendulum's going to swing and they're going to make things safer. But I feel like at this point, you've got to, at least in the beginning and then periodically, check that phone, go through it with them, make sure they're not getting into trouble. Um, the number one boundary I would set, if you're going to remember or listen to anything that I've said, would be no phones in the bedroom or the bathroom. We could extend to that. Um, Nothing good happens in the bedroom with a phone. That's where they get into trouble with the photos and all of the things. So, not to mention the sleep. Like teenagers are not sleeping these days. It's insane. And teenagers are supposed to love to sleep. So they aren't sleeping because they're up on their phones all night. So no phone in the bedroom, put it where it needs to go. Um, and then I think it's just really sitting down with your family and talking about your values as a family and coming up with things that are going to work for you. And it'll be a moving target. You might have to adjust as you go, but it might be that, you're not getting any time on your phone until your homework and your chores are done. It might be that there's no phones at the dinner table. Maybe between 6 and 8 p.m., we put our phones on the counter and we just have family time. It could be that when you have your friends over, you're all going to put your phones on the counter and you're going to go and play and not just sit on your phones. So, yeah, just looking at what you value as a family and what's going to work. And then also to say, if mom and dad notice that your mental health is suffering with this phone, if we see you pulling away, we're going to have to talk about this again and change things. I think a good rule of thumb for total smart time and what some of the data would support would be trying to limit social media and video gaming to 2 hours or less a day. That's like really the ideal time, I think.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, if you're in school till 3:30, you're having
Mm-hmm.
dinner with your family, maybe you're doing like an extracurricular activity, like where's the time, you know?
I don't know. This is what there was a student recently that I met that we looked at his phone and he's in school and he's on his phone for 11 hours a day. It's all night. That's what it is though. It's all night. They're on their
Yeah.
phone all night.
Yeah. That's wild. I just thought of this idea that like Apple or, tech companies need to do this. Maybe it already exists, but I don't think it does. There needs to be a thing where like you buy a team of phones. So like I have my phone, Milo has his phone when he's older. And then how like when you log into a computer, you have the option to select a profile? The phones should be connected. So like the parent phone has everyone's profiles on it and I can just click in and now it's mirroring Milo's phone.
Yeah.
It's genius.
See, now
Like,
you have something to do.
oh yeah, let me just like get my freaking notepad out and I'll
Yeah.
start writing code.
Yeah.
Like Mark Zuckerberg. But yeah, like that, it is genius. And like at any point of day, you can just like click that profile and it's mirroring his phone.
To see what he's up
Like,
to.
And you can go through, like you can use the apps, like you can do all the things. So free idea for Apple.
Someone techie, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, just quickly, I wanted to hear your thoughts on YouTube Kids because everyone listening probably has YouTube Kids in their home. We have some boundaries around YouTube, and it's usually like you can have it if we have a long car ride, like you can watch your YouTube Kids in the car. For a while, like he would have his tablet in the house because we would get home from wherever we were and like he wanted to keep watching it and it was hard to take it away.
Yeah.
But I started to realize like, no, like that's not good for his behavior. And it's much different when it's just in the background on the TV.
Yeah.
Because he'll still be engaged in other things. And all of a sudden he won't be even paying attention to the TV.
Yeah.
But when it's like headphones on, tablet in front of the face, it's a different story.
Yeah.
He's also not allowed to watch it before bed. We watch Bluey like before we do our bedtime routine and that's it. But what are your thoughts on YouTube Kids?
Yeah, I agree. We had to do very similar changes with our son because he was getting wild. And I think it just speaks to how addictive that can be for their little minds, right? Like it's different than the TV. So
yeah,
I don't inherently have anything against YouTube. I just think again, it has to be boundaries and to know that can be similar to like TikTok in the sense that it's these short videos that they're scrolling through and they love it. They love watching it. So I think you can set up your profile to filter certain things out. I think as long as you're around and you are sort of, in the back of your mind monitoring what they're consuming, then that's okay. Because there are good educational programs on there too.
Such good stuff.
Yeah.
And you know what else it is? It's sometimes I even prefer it to like Disney Junior or something because it's very calming. Like some of the things, like some things are not calming and it's actually very annoying. But like there's some channels on YouTube Kids that are like building the Legos and he's recently into this one. It's like this guy that has these two big husky dogs and it's just like the husky dogs like doing things and it's very like low key. There's not like, colors and blah, blah, blah. Like it's just some of the things that he chooses. I'm like, oh my God, this is so good.
So good. Yeah, totally. So I think, arming them with the good programs and then just monitoring to make sure that they're not getting too swept up in the not so good content. And like you're already doing, the boundaries and the routines, like he knows when he can expect it. I think you get into trouble because they do want it all the time. I mean, they love it. So the behaviors can come either if they've just been on it for too long and then you try to take it away, or if it's unpredictable when they're going to get it, because then they're just going to be asking for it and upset all the time.
Yeah, we had to change it to like the iPad is for the car. And like even now we drive him 20 minutes to school. And when he was younger, like he would watch his shows on the way to daycare. But now that he's older, like I don't even bring the iPad in the car anymore unless we're like going somewhere far and we want to have it just in case. But one thing I did was I downloaded a podcast for kids.
Yeah.
And I think he's at the age now where he can follow along and pay attention. So there was one, it's like the Cat in the Hat or something.
Oh, yeah, that's cute.
And it was so cute. And he was like, oh my God, like, because it's the fish from Cat in the Hat that has the podcast. And he's like, it's the fish cast. And he's like, oh my God, mommy, like the fish has a podcast. And like, he's like listening to it. So that was super cute. And something that I never really thought of as entertainment for him was like listening to a podcast, listening to stories. But there's so many kids podcasts out there.
Yeah. Well, we used to love like going in the car and listening to Sharon, Lois, and Bram like on repeat on the tape player. So it's similar thing.
So actually, my mom is buying him something for Christmas that is like this little square device thing that looks like it's for kids. Like it's really like cute. There's no screen on it. Yeah. And it's for listening to stories and podcasts and stuff.
You have to tell me if you like it.
Such a good idea.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, this was lovely. I love this topic so much because I dread the cell phone years and I see the impact that it has on teens, and it's something has to be done. Is there like a ton of research in this area?
There is a lot of research. Like I know we didn't even really get into that, but I'm trying to, like, if people follow me on Instagram or whatever, present some of those studies, and there is a lot of good research that backs this up. I mean, I don't even need research. I know it's a thing. I can see it. But yes, the research definitely backs it up in a big, scary way.
And so I guess it's just going to take some time for the research to be reflected in societal norms, like changes in, it always takes time.
Yeah. And I would say to parents too, like if you do some research and you feel like, oh shoot, I want to change what I'm doing. Like I'm worried that this is harmful for my kid. Like it's never too late to sit down with your child and show your vulnerability. Like I made a mistake and, I'm worried about what this is doing with you. Let's look at this research together, and we have to make changes. And sometimes as a parent, you have to make hard decisions that your parents or your children aren't going to like. But just because they may already have a phone doesn't mean you can't pull back.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so where can people find you online? Tell us what your Instagram account is again.
It's called the Smartphone Effect.
Perfect.
It's nothing crazy. It's just small and started.
Yeah, but that's like, it's genius. Are you going to like pitch yourself to go on, like you should go on like breakfast television, like all those kinds of things to talk about this?
Maybe one day. No? I'm going to talk to a lot of like local schools right now, kind of start off that way. You were like my bigger go home, go bigger, go home. When I saw Matthew, I was like, I told my friends, I'm like, I'm quitting. I can't do it. It's crazy. Like I don't belong on this podcast. I gotta quit. Oh,
that is so funny. People always get so nervous to come on the podcast, and I'm like, Really? Like it's just me in my sweatpants in my basement?
You've made it very relaxing, actually. I don't
Oh,
like public
good. That's
speaking.
good.
Yeah, it's good.
Oh my God, me either. Like, no, 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 no. Okay, well, this has been lovely. So thank you so
Yes,
much for
thank
coming
you.
on. And everybody go follow at the Smartphone Effect. And let's all prepare ourselves for when our children come home from school one day and
Ask
ask
that
for a phone.
question.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks,
Well, thank you
Renee.
so much.
Yeah.
And I'm on a roll.